Spiritual awakening often begins not with dramatic visions or sudden peace, but with discomfort. It starts with a quiet yet undeniable realization that many of the habits you once accepted as normal no longer feel right. The first and most common habit awakened people abandon is unconscious living. This includes mindless scrolling, constant background noise, compulsive entertainment, and any activity used to escape the present moment. What once felt relaxing now feels draining. Awareness makes it impossible to ignore how these habits numb the mind and disconnect you from your inner state. As consciousness sharpens, silence becomes more noticeable. Instead of fearing it, awakened individuals begin to recognize how much of their previous life was spent avoiding stillness. Television, social media, gossip, and endless stimulation were often ways to suppress uncomfortable thoughts or emotions. Awakening removes this buffer. When awareness grows, distraction loses its appeal because it becomes obvious that it delays healing rather than providing relief. This is why many awakened people naturally reduce screen time, stop multitasking, and simplify their daily routines without forcing discipline. Another habit that fades quickly is the tendency to stay in draining environments. Awakened individuals become highly sensitive to energy. Loud places, chaotic conversations, and emotionally negative spaces can feel overwhelming. This sensitivity is not weakness, it is clarity. You begin to notice how certain environments leave you anxious, exhausted, or disconnected from yourself. As a result, there is a natural withdrawal from spaces that thrive on conflict, constant stimulation, or superficial interaction. This can include stepping back from toxic social circles, unhealthy work dynamics, or even family patterns that demand unconscious participation. Along with this comes a deep shift in how time is experienced. Previously, time may have been filled compulsively, as if stillness was something to be avoided. After awakening, presence becomes more valuable than productivity. Moments of quiet reflection, walking without purpose, or sitting with your thoughts begin to feel nourishing. The habit of rushing fades because awareness reveals that urgency often comes from fear rather than necessity. Awakened people also abandon the habit of consuming without intention. This applies not only to media, but to food, information, and emotional input. There is a growing awareness of what is allowed into the mind and body. Overconsumption no longer feels harmless, it feels invasive. You begin choosing quality over quantity, depth over distraction, and meaning over noise. Most importantly, this stage is not about self-improvement or becoming disciplined. It is about honesty. Awakening exposes habits that were built to survive, cope, or numb pain. Letting them go is not an act of sacrifice, but a response to clarity. You no longer abandon habits because you should, but because you cannot unsee their effect on your awareness. This is why the first renunciation feels immediate. Once consciousness awakens, unconscious living becomes unbearable. Presence replaces distraction, simplicity replaces excess, and awareness begins to shape every choice. What looks like withdrawal from the world is actually a return to reality. As awakening deepens, one of the most significant habits that falls away is the constant need for external validation. Before awakening, self-worth is often shaped by approval, recognition, and comparison. Praise feels like proof of value, while criticism feels like a threat to identity. After awakening, this dependence begins to loosen. You start to notice how exhausting it is to measure yourself through the reactions of others. Awareness reveals that chasing validation keeps the self trapped in performance rather than truth. Along with this shift comes the gradual abandonment of people-pleasing. Awakened individuals become painfully aware of how often they said yes when they meant no, stayed silent when they wanted to speak, or shaped themselves to fit expectations. These habits were often formed early in life as survival strategies. They kept peace, avoided rejection, or ensured belonging. Awakening does not judge these patterns, but it exposes them. Once seen clearly, they can no longer operate unconsciously. This stage can feel unsettling because approval once provided emotional security. Letting go of people-pleasing may initially lead to discomfort, conflict, or feelings of guilt. You may notice others reacting strongly when you stop complying with roles they expect you to play. This reaction is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a reflection of change. Awakened people begin choosing honesty over harmony, even when honesty creates tension. They understand that false peace is more damaging than temporary discomfort. Another habit that fades during this phase is comparison. Awakening reveals how comparison fragments awareness. Measuring your journey, success, or growth against others creates constant dissatisfaction. Once consciousness expands, comparison feels artificial and meaningless. You realize that each person is moving through a completely different inner process. Progress can no longer be ranked or evaluated externally. This insight frees you from the pressure to keep up, prove yourself, or appear accomplished. Boundaries also become clearer in this stage. Awakened individuals stop explaining themselves excessively or justifying their choices to gain approval. They begin respecting their time, energy, and emotional capacity. This does not mean becoming cold or detached. It means recognizing that self-respect is a form of honesty. When boundaries are honored, relationships become more genuine, not less loving. This phase also brings a deeper sense of inner authority. Decisions are no longer outsourced to others' opinions or societal expectations. You begin trusting your inner signals, even when they contradict familiar paths. This trust grows slowly, but it becomes more stable than external reassurance ever was. Confidence emerges not from being admired, but from being aligned. The renunciation of validation is not arrogance or isolation, it is liberation. When approval is no longer the currency of worth, fear loses its grip. You stop living to be accepted and start living to be real. This shift marks a profound turning point in awakening, where authenticity replaces performance and inner truth becomes the guide for action. As awakening deepens, one of the most transformative habits that falls away is emotional reactivity. Before awakening, emotions often controlled behavior. Anger demanded expression, fear demanded avoidance, and sadness demanded withdrawal. Reactions felt automatic and justified, as if emotions were facts that required immediate action. Awakening introduces a pause. Emotions still arise, sometimes just as strongly, but there is now awareness watching them. This single shift changes everything. Awakened people begin to recognize that emotions are experiences, not commands. Instead of acting from impulse, they learn to observe what is happening internally. Anger is felt in the body. Fear tightens the chest. Sadness brings heaviness. But none of these sensations require instant response. This observation weakens the habit of reacting defensively, arguing compulsively, or seeking control. Silence becomes an option where reaction once felt necessary. With the loss of emotional reactivity comes the ABA, dawnment of blame. Before awakening, it felt natural to hold others responsible for emotional pain. Situations, people, and circumstances were labeled as the cause of suffering. Awakening reveals a deeper truth. While external events trigger emotions, suffering is created by unconscious identification with them. This realization does not deny pain, but it removes the victim narrative attached to it. Life stops happening to you and starts happening for your awareness. Victimhood is one of the most deeply ingrained habits the awakened mind releases, not because suffering was imagined, but because remaining identified with it keeps awareness trapped in the past. Awakened individuals stop asking, Why did this happen to me? And begin asking, what is this revealing? Responsibility replaces resentment. This does not mean self-blame. It means reclaiming power from external circumstances and bringing it back into awareness. Another habit that dissolves in this phase is the need to defend the ego. Arguments lose their appeal. Being right feels less important than being aware. Awakened people notice how much energy was once spent protecting identity, opinions, and self-image. When identity loosens, there is nothing left to defend. Disagreements no longer feel like threats, and criticism no longer defines worth. This creates a calm presence that can listen without needing to dominate or withdraw. Forgiveness also changes meaning during this stage. It is no longer something done for moral reasons or to appear evolved. Forgiveness becomes a natural consequence of understanding. When you see that others act from their own conditioning, fear, and unconsciousness, resentment loses its foundation. Forgiveness is no longer an effort. It is clarity. This stage is not emotional suppression. Feelings are not avoided or denied. They are fully felt but not personalized. Tears may still fall, anger may still rise, but awareness remains steady beneath them. This steadiness is what creates inner freedom. The renunciation of emotional reactivity is one of the greatest shifts in awakening. It transforms relationships, decision-making, and inner peace. Life becomes less dramatic, not because it is empty, but because awareness no longer feeds conflict. In this space, understanding replaces reaction, and consciousness replaces compulsion. As awakening reaches a deeper level, the final and most difficult habit to abandon is the illusion of control. Before this stage, much of life was driven by the belief that certainty equals safety. Plans, identities, goals, and expectations were used as psychological anchors. Awakening slowly reveals that this need for control is rooted in fear, not wisdom. When awareness deepens, it becomes clear that no amount of planning can fully protect you from uncertainty, and no rigid identity can capture who you truly are. Awakened people begin to release the habit of clinging to fixed self-images. Labels such as successful, spiritual, broken, strong, or awakened itself start to feel limiting. Identity becomes lighter, more fluid. You realize that who you are cannot be reduced to roles, achievements, or past experiences. Letting go of identity can feel unsettling at first, as if something familiar is dissolving. But what remains is presence, something far more stable than any label. This stage also involves releasing attachment to outcomes. Before awakening, happiness was often postponed until certain conditions were met. When life looks a certain way, peace will follow. Awakening reverses this logic. Peace becomes the foundation rather than the reward. You learn to act with care and intention without demanding specific results. This does not lead to passivity, it leads to clarity. Actions become cleaner when they are no longer fueled by fear of failure or obsession with success. Trust replaces control during this phase. Not blind optimism, but a grounded trust in awareness itself. You begin to sense that life unfolds intelligently when you are present with it. Resistance softens. Even uncertainty becomes tolerable, sometimes even meaningful. Instead of fighting change, you start cooperating with it. This creates a deep inner stability that is not dependent on circumstances being favorable. Another habit that dissolves here is the urgency to figure everything out. Questions about purpose, destiny, and future outcomes lose their emotional charge. You realize that understanding unfolds naturally through experience, not mental force. The mind relaxes. Silence becomes comfortable. Not knowing no longer feels like failure, but like openness. This renunciation also changes how you relate to fear. Fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates direction. Awareness sees fear as a signal, not a command. Decisions are made from presence rather than panic. This creates a quiet confidence that does not need reassurance. Ultimately, this final renunciation is not about losing ambition or direction. It is about surrendering false control and gaining inner freedom. Life becomes simpler not because it is reduced, but because resistance has fallen away. There is less striving, less clinging, and less fear. What remains is a steady alignment with the present moment. This is the great renunciation, not of life, but of illusion. In letting go of control, awakened people discover something deeper than certainty. Trust, presence, and a freedom that does not depend on how the future unfolds.